Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar, 2018 Healthcare Recruiting Key Growth Lessons with Evolent Health. My name is Angela Lee, and I'm on the marketing team here at Jobvite. As background, Jobvite enables leading companies to recruit, source, and onboard, all within a single platform. With over 10 years of experience focused solely on recruitment and a recruiting strategy that emphasizes putting candidates at the center of recruiting, Jobvite has helped companies fill over 1 million jobs to date. Now on to the webinar. First, you'll notice that all lines have been muted to avoid background noise. However, we would love to still have your questions. So if you want to use the chat box at the bottom of the Ready Talk panel, we'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation and saving your questions until the end. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dave Thornton, Chief Talent Officer at Evolent Health. Dave?
Terrific. Thanks, Angela. And good day to everyone wherever this may find you today. Excited to chat with you guys today, and a big thanks to Jobvite for the invite. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and I thought I'd give you a little bit of a landscape view of what we're up to. First and foremost, I'll give you a little bit of background on both myself and Evolent Health and our journey over the last 6 or 7 years. We'll talk a little bit about the healthcare talent marketplace, what we're seeing, and that would be a great time to just get observations from the rest of the group as well. And then the bulk of our time will focus in on really what we as a company, Evolent Health, have been doing over the last 6 years to try to differentiate ourselves in the market. If we do this well, hopefully it will help stimulate some ideas, some thoughts amongst the group here. And if we do it really well, we'll get some terrific comments and questions that will hopefully stimulate thought all around. So look forward to engaging with you all throughout the session here. As Angela said, do use that feedback window on the bottom left. We'll be watching it throughout the session, and we'll save plenty of time at the end to get through as many questions as we can. With that, why don't we jump in? And just by nature of introduction, a little bit about me. So I'm here today representing Evolent Health, where I'm the Chief Talent Officer. Talent for Evolent is all things really HR and employee experience. We have all aspects of traditional HR, plus our internal facilities, internal operations. I joined the company way back in February of 2012, just past my 6-year anniversary. I was employee number 21, early stage hire, and an early investment in just the whole notion of talent and culture for the company, which we'll come back to at a later point in today's presentation. Prior to Evolent, I spent 8 years at AOL and Time Warner as part of that broader relationship. Fascinating time to be at the company as it spun out from its membership and paid services business into more of a media and advertising play. And my last few years, I got to learn a lot by working under a pretty large-scale cultural transformation led by AOL CEO Tim Armstrong, who came over from Google and just drove a tremendous amount of effort and work across the business. Very, very cool to be part of. Prior to that, I worked in a few different roles related to consulting, specifically in and around leadership development, performance management, and employee engagement. And then you can see education-wise background in IO psychology. I will be a self-professed culture geek. Love the stuff, love kind of learning and seeing how other companies approach this work. So excited to engage with you all as we jump in. With that, I thought it would be helpful to start and give you guys a little bit of a feel for Evolent and what we've been up to and really our storyline. And this slide looks at really our growth over the first 6 years of our company's life cycle. And you can see this is traditionally I'll present this in a little bit of a build. But you can see it's been pretty rapid growth. Pretty amazing. When I think back to joining Evolent as employee number 21, we had some big, bold aspirations, but this really blew it all out of the water in terms of our experience and really caught a little bit of the quote-unquote unicorn here. We IPO'd about 3 years in, so back in summer of 2015 we went through a successful IPO. We've been publicly traded since. And I should say that this slide needs to be updated because as of today, or as of this month, we're actually up over 3,000 employees. So lots of growth experience, plenty of lessons learned, stumbles along the way, which you can absolutely chat about as we go through here. Okay, so who is Evolent? What do we do? And it really, the story itself has to start with this. So our founders back in 2008, 2009 timeframe, they worked at the advisory board company at the time. And as is quite common across the healthcare industry, and I'd say more broadly, plenty of opportunity for change. And our founders found a significant passion around this just notion of really disrupting how things were playing out. This particular chart looks at projected federal spend over the next 60 to 70 years. You can see it's a classic kind of hockey stick style explosive growth. That's not a good thing. The red line is projected healthcare spend. And gone unchecked or gone without change, you can see at a federal level there's a lot of outlay for things like Medicare, Medicaid, and federal spend. Not news to people on this phone, I'm sure. But that has a huge impact not only on the broader healthcare system, but it has a huge impact on just the level of financial health of the country, whereby we'll be flatlining or declining investments in things like education and military and Social Security as a result. So big opportunity or idea to go after and change this. The other aspect of that spend equation is, although we're spending a lot, we're not necessarily getting great results as an outcome. This particular slide looks at two particular markets in Texas. This is published within the New Yorker magazine, and in particular highlighted around the waste in the system. As you can see, same care, two different markets, markedly different spend. And you could replicate this across many millions of lives across the U.S. And the general healthcare sector. So huge opportunity for us. So effectively what we do is we deliver value-based services in a big way, helping provider systems move from volume to value so that they can ultimately deliver better quality care at a lower cost. Win-win. Higher quality care, lower spend, gives them an opportunity to invest further in R&D or whatever else they might want to get to. Page forward here. So as we think about what we do, how we translate that into our mission, incredibly important. This is our mission statement, to change the health of the nation by changing the way healthcare is delivered. And I share it specifically here because it drives everything we do. I talked to you about the key highlights here. When we talk about changing the health of the nation, it's the financial health, it's the quality of health. Two big outcomes that really drive our work every day, and incredibly important as we think about how we differentiate ourselves in the company. I'm getting a few comments, looks here, Angela, that folks can't hear.
Yep, Dave, I'm responding right back to them. No worries.
Perfect. So big mission, big opportunity for us to really dig in and really disrupt the way care is delivered. We'll get into a little bit more of that as we go through the presentation, but as we page forward, one of the questions that was posed to me is just perspective on the healthcare industry as a whole. And I will admittedly come to this as being a relative newbie. I'm sure there's plenty of folks on this phone who have a lot more experience within the healthcare recruiting run than I do. I'm 6.5 years in. Definitely have a lot of parallels to other industries I've been a part and been exposed to, but would be happy to share some initial thoughts. And when I was asked this question, two words really came to mind. And first one was crowded, very crowded marketplace. The second was very complex. So let's talk about that, right? The first piece being a very crowded marketplace. What do we mean? And for me, clearly it's a Where's Waldo picture, right? Just people everywhere, and you're just trying to find the exact fit. When I think of crowded marketplace, I think of that. I think of just the amount of talent that might be out there. And on the good side, it's been incredibly powerful to see this mission-driven talent that's out in the industry that can be certainly acquired and attracted. That's the win. The challenge nationally is you could do this pretty much same picture for the number of players, the number of competitors for that talent that are out there. I'm sure you've all seen it. It's the slide of pick an industry, healthcare IT specifically, but it's the one that has the logos of all the companies that are going in your space. Incredibly crowded in the marketplace. Population health is a buzz term for sure. It was, I'd say, very buzzy when Evolent was created back in 2011. We saw it become even kind of a tidal wave of companies and organizations jumping into pop health, and it's been a big run there ever since. So that's a crowded space, very competitive, lots to go after. That's not news to you. The other observation I'd share with you is just the complexity of it all. So while this, I would say, is very clearly what it looks like at a national level, like many of you, I'm sure, we also recruit at a local level. We partner with provider systems that might be in one city or a smaller metro area. And the landscape in those markets looks incredibly different than what it does at a national level. I was reminded of this last night where I brought my 11-year-old daughter who's going through this cotillion class. And she had to go to this spring ball last night, right? And you walk in, it's the same people you see everywhere else, right? Not many people you can choose to dance with at this cotillion ball. But it's small towns, small markets, and that brings different and unique challenges. So you're thinking about national play, national needs, local market challenges. Healthcare truly brings all of those challenges together. So what can we do about it? How do you differentiate yourself in a market like that? And that's really where we're going to spend the bulk of our time as we go through this. Okay, keep the questions coming. I see some comments as we're going through it. Bachelor fans, hopefully you're out there. So how do you differentiate yourself in a sea of other competitors? And let's take a minute here to recognize that there's not a very diverse slate of candidates here. They all pretty much look the same. They're all the same height, incredibly. But forget about that for a second. What I'm really trying to show with this is a little bit of how I felt in my recruiting experience back with Evolent 6 years ago. Forget the rose ceremony, but there's a certain feeling here where these individuals are just begging to be selected, right? And I went through a little bit of a romance period with Evolent. It took 14 days from my initial interview. Was just wowed by the team, the mission, the experience, and what they were trying to build, all of 20 people. And they made me feel like just $1 million, right? So that's a feeling that we're trying to build across our candidate experience, whereby when it comes time to receiving that offer, you just are head over heels jumping into this opportunity. So it's a huge, huge chance for us to think about creating an environment that's like a, please pick me. And that's very much part of being a destination workplace. Which leads us to this, the Evolent talent team, our mission from the get-go. And it's laughable now, but I remember my first day at Evolent back in 2012, I sat down and the president of our company handed me a 90-day plan. And as part of that 90-day plan, it had a longer-term objective, which was to build the leading destination for talent in healthcare. Right? And I remember thinking, I love it. We're 20 people. How the heck can you think about that? But it is truly that aspirational goal. That's one that you'll probably never reach, but it's one that you can hang out there and really run at from the get-go. And I'll tell you, that level of aspiration and reach really drives a lot of what we do around here every day. And I feel it's incredibly important when you think about how do you differentiate. You first need to start with some pretty darn high objectives. Okay, so when we think about creating a leading destination, again, a lot of this is just context and framework for some of the things we'll jump into. But when we think about creating a leading destination, frameworks help. We believe in a framework we refer to as the high-performing organization. You can see here there's 4 key attributes of that: strong leadership, talent density, which you can think about as just the highest proportion of great people possible, organizational effectiveness, and culture. And we really try to approach each of these in turn programmatically. One of the big lessons certainly is that you want to do all of this at the same time, and you want to do it from day one. And I think we can say for sure that you don't need to do that. But you do need to be mindful, and you do need to be investing, because all of these areas intersect, and ultimately they all have a big impact on what you can do as a company. But as I said, it's very important to remember that it is not a sprint, and in fact, it's a marathon. This is one of my favorite spots, the start of the Boston Marathon, which is where I grew up. Incredible race day. There are, I think, under 2 feet of snow today, but incredibly, the marathon will be coming up here in just a few short weeks. So as you think of Evolent in our journey, we try to really stage things out. And that was due to some terrific advice I received my first 90 days in from an external person who had built a similar function at a company that had gone through similar scale. And I remember talking to her about all the things we wanted to do and these great ideas I had for just blowing things up and really driving culture change. And she says, yeah, that's great, Dave. We did all those things too, but it took us 10 years to do them. So no need to really rush. Be very staged and intentional in terms of what you're trying to do. So that's really what I wanted to walk through with you all today, is just giving you a sense of how we thought about it. Not saying this is the right way by any means, but I'm hopeful that it gives you some food for thought and some ideas of how you might approach some of your problems. So this gives you a little bit of a timeline. I'm going back to the very early days here, March of 2012. You can see by this point we had already added 2 new employees, very exciting, up from 21 to 23. Interestingly, it was right around this time that we partnered with Jobvite. So Jobvite was one of our first partners that we selected and have been with us ever since. So kind of a neat parallels there. For our stage early on, again, back to the idea of building a leading destination for talent, we started out with a few different ideas. First, how do we recreate that feeling, right? Back to that rose ceremony idea. How do we create the feeling where people just want to be part of what you're building? And for us, it started with defining our culture and the experience that we're looking to create. And very related, we knew we were about to go through a pretty heavy hiring curve. So how do we think about our hiring and onboarding processes? So lots and lots of work early stage against those 2 items. And we'll talk about those in the next few pages here. Culture. Great topic. I mentioned I was a little bit of a culture geek on this one. There's so many amazing things happening out there in the space. For us, when we first sat down and thought about it, we looked at other companies we admired. And specifically, we looked at companies I would label as disruptors. Forget the industry, just organizations that were out there that have been doing compelling things to just be different. These are 4 of our favorites. Hopefully you guys have come across these as well. I remember being hugely influenced by some of the work that Netflix and Patty McCord did around their Netflix culture. If you haven't seen that document, you can search for that pretty easily. But it was incredibly powerful to see just this notion of companies building with intent around their core behaviors and what they truly value across the organization and putting culture first. And thankfully, a big reason why I came to Evolent was we had a leadership team that believed in this, full stop. They wanted to invest in it early, and they wanted to make sure we got it right. Why? Because they felt like we could not get out there and disrupt and do what we needed to do without a strong, aligned talent and culture framework. So that was huge from the get-go. As you play that stuff through for us, early days, it manifested itself into documents like this. This is an early version of our values work, and you'll see it just includes a number of statements, things that we believed in. And I remember I kept pages of this on my wall, and we would circulate this across the team. We'd cross things out over those first few months just as we kind of tested things and got a better feel for what hit and what didn't. But it was truly directional. Many of the decisions that we made, we came back to this document and looked at it and said, gosh, is it delivering against one of these things, or is it in conflict? And it influenced things like our benefit strategy, our PTO strategy, our recruiting work, et cetera. So lots and lots of work that was influenced just by this early stage of getting aligned. And speaking of alignment, that was also incredibly powerful. So to be able to have this one page that you could go across and meet with every employee, every leader, they felt like they owned it as well. Very, very powerful to do. As that plays forward, so we have an idea of culture. We have an idea of the behaviors and things we're trying to create. Back to that wow experience. What does it mean for recruiting? A few things to share with you. First, very early on, we had a belief that we wanted to be very focused on what we needed, what type of talent was required in each of these roles. And you can see a simple matrix here. These 4 quadrants would be something that could be pretty easily pulled together ahead of time. And you can see from a screening and interview strategy, there's different tactics we could take to actually get in and assess. Another big positive early on was that we had leaders who were patient. They were willing to wait to get the A player. It wasn't a rush to get people in the door and people in seat. So they were willing to take the time to both define the needs as well as jump in and make things happen. So that's one piece, is just being very focused on what you want. From there, so you've identified what you want and you start to meet these people, these fantastic talents. So how do you get them excited? And this again was an early stage document we shared with our powerful recruiting team of 2. and our hiring teams, which effectively is creating this wave of emotion from that first conversation. And it went from everything from your recruiter screen to the first on-site, they're meeting the person at the front desk, to calls after the interview, all the way up to onboarding. But it was just this trying to build a wave of momentum so that by the time it came time to make that offer, you were in good shape and the person was ready and willing and excited to jump in. My favorite example of this is back to our first month working in the company, and we had a senior executive candidate that we were trying to woo from another large organization, and they were a little skeptical. It was a relocation. This particular candidate had a spouse who was very dubious on moving to DC. They were very focused on the outdoors, and specifically were looking at water time, effectively. They wanted to be near bodies of water so they can get out and do some really cool things. So it was interesting. We actually flew this person down a third time. So they went through terrific on-sites, and we flew them and their spouse down just to give them a better feel of what's happening. And we rolled it all out, right? So we delivered this package to their hotel. I remember, to welcome them into the city. We then had them on a tour for 24 hours to just show them all that DC had to offer. And it's silly stuff like this, right? But it's not so silly. So the whole idea here is to give them a sense of, hey, here are the potential locations for you, and just highlighting how great DC is for what you want to do. And then it went forward to things like this. Look at all that's within an hour of DC, highlighting some of these kiteboarding spots, sailing locations, kayaking, etc. Probably took us about 10 minutes of time to pull these things together. But I remember in talking to the candidate who ultimately said yes, it's like that level of personal attention and that level of personal awareness differentiated us against some of the other opportunities they were looking at the time. So digging in, really trying to understand what the needs are, what the obstacles are for that individual. It's like any sale. How do you get them fired up and locked into what you're trying to do? So that was fun. That is super difficult to scale, obviously. But there are other things you can do to make that happen. And we'll talk about some of those things as we go through here as well. Okay, looks like a fair number of comments are kind of flying through. Please do ask questions. We'll do our best to flag those as we go on. So early stage. We got the values down. We got the culture in place. We had a little bit of process work. The thing I wanted to call out here, and we won't spend much time on it, but I got a lot of questions around scaling the team and how you actually did that and what it looks like now. And I think the key thing for us is highlighting that it continues to evolve. I would say our talent model, our org support model has changed probably every 18 to 24 months. It's just a consistent evolution. Early on, we had a very, I'd say, an approach to hiring athletes, folks that were they could do a little bit of everything and could jump in and recruit. They could, run a program across the business. They could jump in and help with ops, whatever it might be. But it was incredible to be able to do that. And then as we continued to grow, we started to get much more structured. And this just gives you an idea of more or less how we're structured today. 4 key verticals. You can see talent acquisition there on the far right, focused on all the things you might expect it to be, but very much around sourcing and bringing in and helping us drive that talent density notion by bringing in great external talent. Learning and organizational effectiveness, L&D, culture, programs, other things that are there. Talent management is our business partner in talent solutions area. And then employee experience, focusing on compensation, benefits, wellness, community impact. Our general office space is a bunch of different elements. So it's neat. Everything is kind of connected at this point. And if you go back to that high-performing org model, everything flows through, and we're able to really, truly connect the dots. The other fun thing for me to note is the names that are not in these boxes that are certainly part of the team have been here a very long time. So we've had continuity from the get-go and folks that have been believers in the company mission and I'd say truly excited by the talent mission behind it. So that's terrifically helpful. Okay. Pressing onward. You can see March 2014, we're getting up to a pretty big spike. And we're at a point now where I'll tell you I've met everyone, but I don't know everyone. Certainly not in the depth that I did a year or two prior. And it was right around that point in time where we started to say, good opportunity for us to refresh culture and values, pour some concrete around it, make sure it truly does scale. And we went through a terrific process that summer to do just that. We looked at all those disruptors again. We also looked at some of our competitors and some of the best-in-class research out there. And I can thankfully say, and I'll show you this in a second, our values very much stayed full. This is a great quote from Brian Chesky, which was one of those disruptors, if you remember, Airbnb. Culture is forever. That's the baseline message here. So if you're able to really entrench these values and behaviors from a recruiting standpoint or from a broader employee engagement standpoint, you can really drive big outcomes. For Evolent, those translated into our values. They drive everything we do today. Again, when we reward folks, when we assess performance, these play in. When we're hiring and selecting for talent, we're screening against these elements to get a sense of what fits and what doesn't. And I'm also happy to say that when we miss, and we do miss, but when we miss, we're able to catch those. And these are elements that help us defend our culture as well. Okay. So the next piece I wanted to talk about, and we've just got a few more sections here, and then we'll open it up. But we've talked about the importance of culture and values when you differentiate, how you define a true destination workplace from that perspective. But as you operationalize, it gets more challenging. And I'm sure this is one of the big challenges many of you face. As we continue to scale, you can see the bump here. Early 2015, we're approaching 1,000 employees. We also went public. So we had that glorious day where we were up at the New York Stock Exchange, and all of a sudden our world was very different. We weren't private anymore. We were publicly traded. And I see one of the questions here is around, are you profit or nonprofit or for-profit? We're for-profit. And those are big days, right? So as you spin out your publicly traded company, new expectations come with that, and a lot of new rigor needs to be applied, which is probably worth an entirely different webinar. But when the world of recruiting, if we're really trying to think about how do you continue to drive results in that type of an environment and in that type of an organization that's much, much larger, the other thing we started to do is we really zeroed in on the importance of the people leader, the manager. And some of you may have seen Google has done tremendous work on this in their work around what they call Project Oxygen, which looks at the behaviors that make a great leader. This is our version of that, more or less. We had core behaviors that we looked at across managers, and we helped assess managers and get regular feedback to them, and we ultimately were able to link those behaviors into broader performance. So if we think about how do you differentiate, obviously the old adage goes, right? People don't quit companies, they quit their manager. We found people leaders to be an incredibly important lever. As we dug in, we looked at a few different elements when we talk about a great leader. You can see performance. That's a performance measure. You can see their ability to hire and retain over the course of a long period of time. And then we can see those manager dashboard behaviors that I highlighted on the other page. And here's the neat thing. When you did this, and we did this for hundreds of leaders really across the board, we were able to produce an index score. And this next page shows how all those managers really plotted out across those index scores. Pretty wide array, right? Not surprising in any kind of scaled company. You're going to see a fair number of green or new managers and some seasoned and pros. And those really carried out here. The fun thing for us was it was validated by looking at the impact that they had on their environments. And effectively, managers who are in the bottom third we found to be very, high risk is one way to think about it, but they were much more likely to lose talent. They were much more likely to hire poor talent than others. And by reinforcing that and driving those behaviors was incredibly powerful. So hopefully that helps make sense. I think there's another notion out there. You know, it's actually, if I page back a slide or two, this piece, hiring key talent. Hit rate, you can think about batting average as a couple of folks have out there and been published on this. But for every hire you bring in, how likely are they to still be here and performing at a strong level a year from now? So from a recruiting perspective, every recruiter should have an understanding of how they've done across the last year and how their hiring managers have done across the last year. If for nothing else, is incredibly powerful learning tool. So that's proven to be very, very helpful as we work with managers to help them drive great results. All right. Last piece well, second to last piece. But another big element here is obviously just continuing to scale the function itself. How do you blow this team out, right? How do you get reinforcements along the way? And for us, it's hit on a number of different fronts. Certainly, as we've grown, we've had to scale the recruiting team just in terms of sheer size, number of people on the team. But I'll tell you, we're still pretty efficient for the number of hires that we're doing. But that's been certainly a big part of it. Now, we've scaled that up with the use of technology and tools and assessments and other things just to help us be more efficient. But we've also, back to the manager point, heavily engaged with those hiring teams, training them up on techniques, behavioral-based interviewing, other assessments that can really be a force multiplier for us. But if you're going to be a A+ in the hiring game, or if you aspire to be an A+ in the hiring game, which I'd put us more in the aspiring stage, you really need to rally everyone around the cause, and that's been a big part of what we've been trying to do and continue to try to do as we scale this up. So regular, consistent effort on our end from there. So, what's next? Where are we going? I mentioned we just crossed 3,000 people. We now have staff that are outside of the U.S. as well, which is bringing all sorts of new fun and challenges, which is great. Terrific things to go after. But we're going to continue to push. I'd say this year we have 4 big goals, really back to that high-performing org network or org framework. Quality of hire continues to be a big push, making sure that as our volume increases, our quality does not decrease, and really ensuring we're focusing following on that. That has impact both on our recruiting team as well as our hiring managers. Leadership depth, ensuring that we have strong people leaders really at all levels of the organization. Those dashboards play a big role, but ensuring we're doing our best to identify and support folks that might need extra help. Incredibly important for our ability to both retain and attract new talent. Culture. As our company has scaled, our demographics have widely diverged. So we have a very dispersed workforce today across the U.S. Many different locations, many different types of workers. So from a cultural perspective, how do we ensure that sings for everyone involved? And we have a team that's devoted to really thinking about differentiating employee experience to ensure it's a leading destination. And then last, and this kind of hits everything, but our organizational effectiveness efforts. Are we doing things as efficiently, as effective as possible? That's both our work to consult in the business, but also specific to the talent team. How do we continue to refine our processes to ensure we're really trying to drive things? So lots of fun, lots of work ahead. One of the things Angela asked me is, what are the other big takeaways, right? What are the lessons learned across these first 6 years? And I'll share the following. So first and foremost, if you recall, you don't have to do everything at once. Take a breath. There's no way you can do that successfully. You're going to hurt yourself in the process, but probably just as importantly, the organization just will not be receptive to it. So stage it out. That goes for every function within the broader talent team as well, but stage it out and work, and I think this stuff truly builds off each other. 2, back to the quote from Mr. Chesky, culture is hugely powerful. Those values, if done well, can guide decision-making and in fact do. And I think if you are true to that and are consistent with that, it can have a big lasting impact on the type of talent. 3, and I showed you our org chart, but I'd say bet on talent. We made some early stage hires, including the company hiring me. But specific to my team, we made some early stage hires that arguably might have been too soon, and I don't regret any of them. It's just investing in the function and the importance of what we're trying to do. I don't think we've had any regrets. Last 2 are kind of fun, more personal. We didn't get to go into depth on them in this call, but in a world that's moving so fast and we're still trying to make things happen, it's okay to fail. So how do you get things and create a culture around you where you can test some new ideas? And if they work, terrific, you scale them. If they don't work, you strip them down and you go some other way. And thankfully, we've been able to keep that culture and vibe here for the last 6 years. And then last, this is a little bit back to that rose ceremony, or for the Disney fans out there, creating that park magic. But it's every opportunity counts. So from a recruiting team, whether it's your first interaction with the careers page or your first communication with somebody on the team, all that stuff matters. And it matters in full as you start to think about the on-site experience, et cetera. But every one of those interactions is a chance to build loyalty and excitement with the organization. That's a big part of our daily challenge. We measure it. We try to get a sense of how people are feeling about our experience really at all stages, both interview, pre-hire, post-hire, and it's a big part of what we're trying to do. So hopefully that's helpful for you all. I see there's a bunch of questions that have popped through here, and maybe Angela, I can get your help to think about how we want to approach these. Do you want to just try to go through and hit them one by one?
Sure, that sounds good, Dave. I think the first question we have is a question around what are some strategies that can be used to retain the folks that you employ upon recruiting them?
Yeah, our favorite strategy, all the classics come up around total rewards, and that stuff's important, but honestly the big piece there is showing a path for growth. And I've been exposed to a few different organizations that have done this incredibly well. When we do it well, it's as simple as a 1 or 2 page document that talks specifically to what the employee is interested in doing, gets explicit in terms of how we feel about them and what we think about their strengths, and then presents a few different pathways. Here are 2 to 3 options that could play out for you over the next 2 to 3 years. There's no guarantees, but it helps put a vision, a specific picture to someone of where they can go. And as Frank, our CEO, often says, we have the benefit of living on the steep part of the curve, the growth curve. And with that growth curve, you have a lot of opportunities emerging. So it's for folks that are looking for new, bigger experiences, it feels like there's always just one more right around the corner. So that would be tops of the list, would be development.
Got it. And we have another question here asking how many recruiters are on staff at Evolent right now?
Yeah, so our team is really focused in. We've got a group of recruiters and coordinators, and all in we're about a dozen.
Fantastic. We have another question here about just your view on how healthcare recruiting has changed just in your experience over the last few years. How have you seen that shift?
Sorry, Angela, could you just repeat that?
Sure, yeah. So the question was around how you see healthcare recruiting change in the last few years.
Yeah, like I said, I've been at this for a good 6 years. If anything, it's just getting more crowded around folks moving into the value-based space. So specific, hot interest in talent that's been out there, working with physicians, working in the communities that are really driving changes at the practice level. And we didn't see that, certainly 6 years ago. Beyond that, I would say, 6 years ago, no one knew who we were. So there was a different challenge for us of just building up some baseline brand recognition. And I'll tell you today, we're nowhere near where we want to be, but it's far more likely today that we'll bump into someone who knows us, although they still may pronounce our name Evolent, which is, not the best.
Awesome. And Dave, I know you talked a lot about culture at Evolent, and so we have a question here about how you would define the culture of the company.
Sure. Yeah, you can go back to those values. I think they'll give you a good idea of the things that we truly value across the organization. But just at a high level, we are a very fast-twitch place. Things are moving incredibly quickly across our industry, and we need to be agile and very much focused in on that. I'll also say, from our DNA of the advisory board, it's very results-oriented. So building in a company that's focused in on delivering outcomes, critical to what we're trying to do really across the board. And I'd say with those results kind of comes a lot of great things, flexibility and broader elements which we're trying to drive. The other value which I love and is incredibly important for us is one we call humility. And Reed Hastings is the CEO of Netflix. He's got a phrase, I think, as part of their values work called "No brilliant jerks." But we believe in that wholeheartedly. As a recruiting function, we're looking for talent that can practice truly at the top of their license, but they also realize that they can learn a lot from those around them and continue to create an environment that treats others with respect. Very, very important.
Great. And we had a question that just came in about if there's a specific person on the team that's dedicated to culture and employee engagement?
Yeah, it's shared. So great question. We have a number of folks thinking about it regularly. Back to that org chart, but we've got a team dedicated to the employee experience, and they're thinking about all assets of that. We've got a small team of folks thinking about measurement and how do we assess how folks are thinking about engagement. And I'll tell you personally, I think about culture and engagement pretty regularly. So it takes a village to really carry that through.
Great. And another question that just came in was, does Evolent outsource any of the recruiting functions that it does?
Yeah, from time to time we do. The bulk of what we do, we do in-house. But anytime we'll use kind of two different scenarios. One is if there's a particular niche executive role, we'll often partner with a retained firm to go after that, and I've had very strong success with a number of firms there. And then two is if we have a new market launch, or something like that, where we need high volume in a very short period of time, and if our resources are stacked against other things, we'll certainly get some help from some select agencies every now and again. But the bulk, 95% plus, is handled in-house.
Got it. We had another question that just came in is, how many open positions are your recruiters working on average?
Yeah, it varies, right? So the types of roles we have has continued to diversify in a big way. So I'd say across our professional positions, it can vary anywhere from, say, 12 to 25. But we also have higher volume roles, customer service reps, claims professionals, even some of our care manager positions at times where you'll have folks carrying rec loads up into the 40s.
Got it. Great, and we have another question that just came on. Let me just scroll up a little bit. Do you have a team for employer branding, and specifically, what tools do you use?
Yeah, so it's like anything else in our company. It's not a formal team, but more of a task force. So we'll have folks specific on our recruiting team. We've identified some individuals each year that'll jump in and help work against those elements. They'll partner with our marketing team and our corporate communications teams to really help drive things through. So it's another one of those things where I think we're trying to leverage really expertise across the board, and it's been good. I think back to our values work and translating that to the external community, having that marketing assistance was huge from us from just getting the message right.
Got it. And we have one other question that just came in, is specifically around employee engagement. The question is, do you report out on employee engagement performance to the entire company?
We do, indeed. Yeah, it's a big one. So we measure engagement twice a year. And we make a big deal out of that. We'll share results at a firm-wide meeting. Department-level results are shared locally within departments, and then typically we'll do a brown bag or something else where folks can explore. So if they want to dig in on questions and share on answers, then we'll create that space for it. But if you're going to take the time to measure, then you darn well better make the time to communicate it out, and we feel very important about that.
All right, we have another question around competitors. Who do you think your biggest competitors are in the healthcare market?
It's so hard. At a national level, we compete with certainly the large payers, big competition and big depth. So you'll run into that. On the value-based side, it could be any number of organizations. And then certainly, as we start to think about our local environment, it's local providers, right? So we might be jumping into a new market, and it might be a two-system town, if you will. So we're looking at really local competition to get care advisors on board. So it really runs the gamut, and I think that's part of what keeps us on our toes. Great,
and we have a question specifically about Jobvite. So the question is, what analytics are you pulling from Jobvite specifically to show the ROI of your talent team?
Interesting question. So Jobvite, I think we found, and if I think back to the first instance we had 6 years ago, it's very different than it is today. But pretty robust reporting capability. We're pulling out all the classic pipeline stats, certainly just to get a sense of what that looks like and how long it does, and what the various points are in terms of filling and closing positions. We're also taking a lot of more or less bio data. So thinking about from a pure application standpoint, what kind of information are we gathering and how do we actually apply that to long-term company performance? So our team that's responsible for engagement analysis and broader analytics recently went through a study looking at care advisors, to get a sense of what drives a great care advisor. And are there different characteristics you could capture in someone's resume or background that would lead to a better performer? And that was super fascinating. I mean, we've got tens of thousands of resumes at this point that you can mine and get a sense of really what drives change. So that's a very rich area for us to dig into.
Got it. We had 2 more questions that just popped in. The question is, what is the average time to hire for your roles, and what metrics do you hold your team accountable to?
Sure. I think on average we're right in that 45 to 50 zone in terms of time to fill. Again, it does vary by job function, but in general that's it. In terms of what we hold accountable to, it's less about speed and again more on the quality end. So we'll monitor time to fill, but it's not something that's necessarily going to come back to haunt you. We certainly have our share of positions that are well beyond those average of 45 days, but we're constantly trying to toggle between timeliness and efficiency and ultimately longer term quality.
Great. And we have another question here. The question is that Evolent, is the recruitment function divided up amongst recruiters by specific departments or specific positions or specific job classifications?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. All of those things over time. So back to I mentioned that our organization has continued to evolve. We've had to specialize as we've grown. So the early days, we had folks who recruited against everything, and you might have been assigned a few different groups that were pretty diverse. Today we're getting much more specific expertise. So we'll have someone who's really responsible for a department or a function. And if the rec load allows for it, they might pick up another smaller group, but we're getting much more specialized today. And that's usually around both geographic market and job type.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I think that's all the questions that have come through so far. So appreciate the time that you made to spend with us and our attendees today. And to the attendees, thank you again for joining our webinar today. If we weren't able to get to your question, I think we've got through about 99% of them, but someone will be reaching out to you either tomorrow or next week. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, everyone.